Hi Sam, welcome to the Maestro Online.
Hi, Robin. Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. So it's great to have you here. Now you're somebody with a very different background to many of the other people who have on the Maestro Online. Tell me about how your musical journey began.
Began when I was young, maybe 12, 13. Got into just popular music when I was a kid. Started listening to a lot of soul records and things like that. Made me want to be a musician myself. So then I started singing at age 13 and then started playing guitar and bass at 14, 15, 16, something
Were
like that.
did you have a musical family around you? Was it
No,
something
not
you
at
grew up with?
all. Not at all. My dad was an accountant until he retired, and my stepmother was a teacher. So no, not a musical family at all. I don't honestly have no idea where it came from. I just
It was just
liked
inside
it.
you.
So I did it. Yeah, pretty much.
So
Yeah.
did you then pursue lessons in these areas?
I had singing lessons for maybe 3 years when I was a kid. As for guitar and bass, that's all self-taught. When I was, yeah, like I said, like 14, 15. And then I didn't do any musical education until I went to sixth form when I was 16, 17. And then I did music. What was the course called? It was music technology A level.
Music
Uh,
technology A level. Okay, so where did you go from there?
where did I go from there? Then I went to university to study economics. So
Okay.
off the musical train again. But pretty much from the age of 15, 16, I was on stage gigging. I was very much in the musical community, playing on stage with bands, rehearsing a lot, writing songs, and I was always in my room just with a computer, making.
So when you went and did economics, was that you didn't think there was a career in music, that you felt you needed something more traditional to secure your future, or
Yeah,
did
a little bit of that. I still believe you don't need certainly in the music production world, I don't think you need a music production degree to get a job in music production. I mean, look at me now.
but at that young age when you're going to university, did you see yourself as
At
heading
that young
towards the?
age, it was a conversation I was having with myself. Certainly, it
Okay,
was. Do I want to go to uni and study music? At the time, I wasn't as passionate about it as I am now. So there was a little bit of me that was like, well, it might not lead to a fantastic career. But to be honest, when I got to second year of uni, it kind of dawned on me that I'm going to do music for
yeah.
after whether I've got a career in it or not. So I don't think it. I think it almost fueled the being at uni and not doing music on my course, but having the time outside of my course to really pursue it kind of kept the fire alive for it. Because I know people that went the other way, and they had a massive passion for music and production at age, 16, 17, went to uni, studied it, and they fell out of love with it, which is such a shame, I think.
Yes.
So I'm glad I did it this way around. And I don't have any regrets about it really. The only downside I would say isn't a music production thing, it's just a music thing. I think the guys that went to study music or performance or something like that just had a lot more time with their instruments than I did because they were doing it every day.
So
I go on.
yeah, there's this, when you said you were gigging and everything. There's a big world of difference between performing and music production, and
Absolutely.
there's well, in fact, there's a gulf of difference. So,
100%.
so what was the thing that made you think, even though you loved gigging, that music production was the way to go as opposed to performing?
Yeah, so well, I kind of got really into production, I guess, after I left uni, and I started on an internship in a recording studio, and it came about because all the way while I was creating music and composing, I was doing it in a DAW, and I was doing it through a computer, and it slowly upgraded my system over time. But that was kind of where my creative juices got flowing.
Yeah,
Whereas I know for a lot of other musicians and composers, it's just sat down with their instrument. And while I do sing and while I do play guitar and while I do bass, I think the DAW and being a producer is my first instrument, really. That's where I can really create, and that's where I'm really, really home. So it's just my love for that. And also when I started, it was music engineering I was doing rather than music production, which is a bit more technical based. It's a bit more learning how the consoles work and things like that. And I
yeah.
really enjoy the kind of tech side of things
So
too.
there's two sides that you've touched on there. One is the the console side or the DAW side in terms of knowing what to do and the technical side, but you also use the word create.
Mm.
So tell me about how you see that as a creative role. I mean, there's obviously famously the fifth Beatle.
Of course, exactly. The creative role, I think I think engineers and producers don't get enough credit, to be honest. But I would, wouldn't I? Yeah, it's a massive thing about it. I think one of the large things about it is tone. The As a guitarist, I know that if I'm improvising a solo or something, I'm gonna play differently depending on what the guitar tone is. If it's a super clean guitar tone, I'm gonna
Yeah.
play a lot brighter maybe. But if it's a Jimi Hendrix style guitar tone that I'm hearing, then I'm gonna probably give it a bit more oomph, and I'm gonna give it a bit more of that lead guitar kind of feel to it. Same concept can be taken to the studio. If you're a drummer and you're drumming and there's only one mic in the room, and it sounds like all the drums are bouncing off the room, it tends to feel a lot more live. So you're going to almost feel a lot more immersed in that. Whereas if it's set up so that everything's really closely mic'd, for example, and you're hearing all the intricate parts of the kit, it can sound a little sterile sometimes. It can sound a little clinical. So, it really influences the performer in the room.
Yeah.
Is a massive thing. And then if we're just talking about the recording process from start to finish, the producer, the recording engineer, and the mix engineer in particular all have a hand to say in how that final record comes out. And their creative influence, while it's often based on the artist's vision or whoever it may be who's written the piece, they will still be influencing the piece creatively, and the message that's delivered at the end of the final product will be massively influenced by those people.
So from your internship, where did you go next?
So I stayed there. I stayed in the studio, but I stopped interning and started doing freelance work. So I was in the lucky position that I got a pretty good relationship with the owner there. So they said that I could still use the studio for my own clients and things like that. And as long as I just carried on doing a few sessions for them every now and then, which was very lucky, and I was in a very fortunate position to be in, because here in London it's quite hard to find studio spaces to take on clients and things. At the beginning of that journey, that was just engineering by itself, and then I probably did just engineering for 8-9 months,
So
and then
just explain what just engineering means.
so just engineering is usually, well, in my world, it was either recording or mixing. So it was band comes in and they've got an album to record in a week, for example. My job would be set up the mics, talk about tone with the instrumentalists, but I don't have a say in the writing. Really, I don't really have a say in the lyrics or anything like that. It's not so much of a songwriting perspective that a producer's role might have. It's way more of a tech perspective and making sure that everything's blending together nicely. The tones of things are working well. And don't get me wrong, it's still very collaborative with the artist. I think the most important question an engineer should ask the artist is, do you like this? Are we on the right track? But it's certainly a much more kind of technical approach to music production. Whereas production, being a producer, actually has very different roles depending on what kind of producer you are. And if it's talking about commercial music, it also depends on what kind of genre you're in. If it's hip hop, often your role as the producer is to make the beats. If it's rock, a lot of the time your role as the producer is to just tweak lyrics, and a lot of the songwriting element is already done for you. So the role can definitely vary. And then after I freelanced for a while, I worked as a music producer for a music agency called Massive Music. They specialize in sonic branding, but they do a lot of music for advertising and things like that, which is another term where the word music producer comes in. And there I was, doing all kinds of things, from working with composers to, managing projects and budgets for projects and things like that.
Yeah, so that must have really expanded your opportunities enormously.
100%, yeah, and also just opened up my kind of view on the world of advertising, because I've never worked in advertising before, and the way that music plays a massive part, a massive role in that. And it's interesting composing. And now I compose. I do a lot of composition for adverts and sonic branding and things like that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting composing with the brief as opposed to composing as a songwriter, which is often just from your heart and you're expressing whatever you want to express. But composing to a brief, you've really got to be able to understand what choices you make and how they can influence and convey emotion.
Yes,
And
I'm presumably you're also talking about your target market and whether the style reaches the particular age or the particular gender or the particular economic background or whatever.
absolutely, all of that stuff. Making sure that it's in the right world, just in the right,
Yes.
in the right world of the product or in the right world of the brand. And sometimes that can be very hard to decipher. And I think one of the biggest challenges for being a producer is it's not the tech. That comes over time and just with more practice. But one of the hardest things is just being able to convey what you mean, because everything's collaborative pretty much always, whether it's a client or whether it's another producer or whether it's a musician. Just being able to convey and communicate ideas is a really tough thing to be able to do, and having the right language for that, and using the right references for that, I think is really important. And just understanding different people's backgrounds and having some compassion for other musicians and where they come from is really important in that
Do
regard.
you find yourself, when you get a brief, researching a lot of music in the particular style similar to the brief, almost like an artist's sketchbook, where an artist would look at other artists and get ideas?
That's exactly what we do pretty much. We call it a mood board, but it's exactly
Right.
the same concept. Yeah. In fact, the first thing we do when we take on a private client for a business is do mood boarding sessions with them. So we will write playlists of maybe 30, 40, 50 tracks. And then we'll whittle them down to 3 tracks that we think encompass the idea of whatever the composition may be. Present that to the client first and say, is this kind of the right ballpark? Is this kind of what you're looking for? What do you like about this? What don't you like about this? Here are my thoughts on this. And just start a conversation about it is the most
Yeah.
important thing to
Yeah.
start with.
And then the creative process from there, then presumably, is now you've got your mood board, is to look at the chord progressions, the grooves, the rhythms,
Yeah,
etc., that create that style. And so using essentially the basic elements of music, what makes that style, and then lifting some of those key features into a new piece of work.
absolutely. Yep, yep, that's it. And I think that's the most important process is that beginning bit, and it's being able to listen and really depict and analyze and break down pieces of music. Because once you can break a piece of music down into all its elements, then creating those elements back again, or taking influences and creating new things becomes a way, way easier. Otherwise just sat at a synthesizer for 3 hours, not really knowing what you're aiming for.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because I think some people maybe see songwriters or composers as suddenly having, a miraculous moment and a divine intervention, and something comes into their head and off they go. And those moments might occur, but but more often than not, there's a whole wealth of experience that makes the
I
language that they have.
Absolutely. I think for the Hans Zimmers out there, that does
Yeah,
happen. Stories about him composing for Interstellar and things like that. It's like, yeah, I just sat down and did it. But
yeah,
that's certainly not the majority of us.
no.
And it is certainly a skill to be able to listen and really, really listen and break things down is a skill in itself, and one that I think all composers should have.
Do you think that's something you've learnt on the job and has grown with maturity in years, or is it
Absolutely.
something that you've really been taught?
Um, it's something that I've learned from other people, but not necessarily sat down and had lessons for.
Right.
Um, while I think you can, of course, you can have lessons and you can always learn from other people. But I think doing it has really, yeah, honed in my ability. Doing things, making mistakes, and hearing feedback on those mistakes from other composers or partners or whoever you might be working with, and then taking that on board and going back to what I mentioned earlier, just having some, understanding other people's backgrounds and trying to put yourself
Yes.
in other people's shoes in terms of listening as well.
Well, I was going to say, I think you've just distinguished between two things as well, which is really important for creative musicians. Is there's a difference between listening and hearing?
100%. Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, really, really listening. Even as a musician, let alone a composer, is really, really important. I think, I used to I used to teach singing informally as well. And I think one of the first things I would say to my students is this is far more about listening to your own voice than it is about
Yeah.
you know, breathing or projecting or having a beautiful voice or vibrato or anything like that. You know, it's all about listening. And because singing's my first instrument, that's what I went to. But I'm sure every other music teacher will say the same thing about every instrument that they teach. You know,
Well,
it's
well,
all about.
fascinatingly, I was recording with somebody who's one of our leading choral conductors a few weeks ago, and I asked her because her choir sings some of the hardest, most fantastic stuff, and they learn it really quickly, and they're incredibly detailed and expressive. And I asked her about rehearsals, and she said 90% of my rehearsals are listening exercises, and
Yeah,
only 10% is the singing, and that was really interesting to hear.
that's fascinating, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah,
and especially something so intricate, such an intricate as choir and things like that as well.
yeah.
You know,
So,
yeah.
so what would you say is the highlight of your career? Have you got a
Highlight of my
moment
highlight of my career.
or something musical that you've done or been involved in that's going to stick with you?
Yeah. Um, I had a client. Hold on, let me just put this story together before I tell it. Um, I had a client. Hold on, let me piece it together first. Yeah, I had a client about 6 months ago, a year ago. New client. She was 20, 21, young, great singer, but hadn't done anything before, really. Hadn't been on stage before, hadn't made a record before. And she had written some songs and wanted to record them properly. So we went to the studio, and I could tell from the moment we walked in, she was really nervous, really nervous. And as a singer, you'll know that that comes through when you're singing a lot.
Yes.
So we started behind the mic, but almost instantly I was like, let's just forget about recording, you know. And we just talked for an hour of this 3 hour recording session. We just talked for an hour. And you know, I think it was just about breaking down that barrier of I'm a producer, but I'm actually just a normal guy. And this is a studio, but it's really just a room, you know. And I
Yeah.
think that's a good highlight. It's just, you know, bringing people into the world of music and just showing them that it's fantastic and it's not that scary really once you're doing it. It's just really fun and
Bringing
just
the best out of people. Mm,
100%.
mm.
Yeah. And I think
So,
that's what every producer's goal should be, really. You
yeah.
know, and
So,
that's the real
so what's the ultimate Sam Fever pearl of wisdom? If you were to give somebody a piece of advice, what would be your ultimate pearl of wisdom?
pearl of wisdom. The music business is far more about people than it is about music. It doesn't matter whether you are a musician or a music producer or an engineer or a musical director or whatever. You will have to work with people. Even if you're a solo singer songwriter, you will have to work with people along your journey. And you want to make their lives as easy as possible because then they're going to make your life as easy as possible. And I know from experience that the early days of being an artist, if that's the route you're going down, is very, very tough, financially, spiritually, all of the above. So just make everyone's life a lot easier, and they will certainly do the same for you.
Sam Fever, thank you very much for your pearl of wisdom, making
Yeah.
everybody's life easier and definitely working as a team.
100%. That's what it's all
Thank
about.
you so much, Sam. Take care.
Cheers. Thank you. Have a good one.